Why play Automata? Well, you have one of the win conditions for this comp because it has many win conditions that can give you an easy first. You want to play a comp that caps very high because if you have an emblem or these win conditions, you have a very good chance of going first. You have solid items for the comp, so you can still play it for a top 4 and you have a really good spot for it. Or you're in a very high variance encounter where you can roll into one of those win conditions that we will talk about in this presentation. However, this comp is a little bit on the weaker side without these win cons. It is still a solid comp where you can get a reliable top 4, just a little bit harder to win the lobby with. It is reliant on some high rolls because often you're re-rolling and trying to find high cost units, so in order to have enough gold to do everything, it becomes a little bit difficult. It's very easy to go 8th from low rolling for the same reason, because if you don't hit any of these win cons, or if you don't have a good spot for the comp itself, you often could just bleed out and lose a lot of HP. And additionally, the units are often contested because many people try to play around these in these high variance portals or encounters. So this is my channel, Fenrir Gaming. Please make sure to like and subscribe. 90% of you aren't subscribed, but a large majority of you are returning viewers. If any of my videos helped you out and you watched 1 or 2 of my videos, please make sure to subscribe because it does help me out and it is free to do that. So what is Automata? Let's go through the trait itself. So Automatas gain a crystal when they deal damage at 20 crystals. They blast their current target, dealing magic damage plus 25% of the damage dealt since the previous blast, and reset. They also gain armor and magic resist. So this trait is very well rounded. It recently got a lot of nerfs and that's why it became very popular. It recently got a lot of buffs, and that's why it became very popular. The 20 crystals ramping up works really well with a lot of the units because they do attack very fast if you're looking at the main damage dealers, which are either Nocturne or Kog'Maw. If you read the ability or the description, you'll see that there's this large spike between 2, 4, and 6 Automata in terms of both the damage that it does. So this is a magic damage burst that happens after they reach their 20 crystals. So you have 150 starting, and then it goes to 400, then it goes to a massive 1100 when you get to 6. And then they also gain armor and MR, which makes them quite tanky, especially if you get deep into the Automata trait. But 6 Automata, especially if you look at it, is a massive spike in both the armor as well as the damage done. So a lot of times when you're playing around Automata, you want to hit 6 Automata. But if you can count, you'll see that there's 5 Automata units, and that means that you need an emblem in order to hit 6. So it is a bit of a harder thing to achieve. 4 Automata is still strong, but it does require a little bit of high roll to actually make the board work together really well, or you have to have a good spot for the units. So that leads us into when to play Automata. Well, you could have really good items or a good spot that's indicative of either playing around Kog'Maw or playing around Nocturne. They require different items and different things, and it's hard to play both of them often. But if you manage to get into a situation where you have items for everybody, it does work out really well because the armor makes your board inherently tanky without relying on an extra trait to give you that tankiness. So it is quite a good comp to play. It is reliable. It's just really hard sometimes because you have to reroll many different costs of units. So make sure your spot is good. The other ways you would play it is usually if you roll into one of these win cons. Automata emblem is absolutely busted because if you can hit 6 Automata, it's almost game winning always. And also there's a lot of Ornn artifacts that you can basically use with Nocturne and just win the game for free. I have Fishbones here. We're going to talk about that a bunch, but that's what I mean by win cons. Either of these are considered, to me, in my opinion, win cons for the comp. And if you see like an early Automata crest, it's really nice to play around it. It gives you really good stability in your early and mid game. And then if you see Ornn artifacts or any way to generate a bunch of Ornn artifacts, then you're going to be in a really great spot. Which leads me to like the last time you should play it, which is Ornn artifacts, right? In general, like even if you don't hit the exact Ornn artifact, you can angle yourself towards the comp if you are in a situation where you know you are going to get more Ornn artifacts, similar to like Artifactory, or if you have something like a shimmer scale item that you can generate a lot of gold that will help you in order to hit the entire comp, which we'll talk about as well. But these are all good options to when you should try and angle yourself towards playing Automata. So let's go through the boards. Before we go through the boards, we'll talk about the units themselves. So Automata is, as I said before, there are 5 Automata units, and they don't really synergize that well with each other, but Automata is a trait that gives you a lot of damage in terms of like this magic damage that you get from the blasts, but it also gives a lot of armor, so these units can become very tanky, especially if you get deep into the Automata trait. So you don't have to worry too much about having extra synergies to make an additional front line or an additional back line, because depending on the units that you itemize, you should be fine on both regards. There's mostly consists of low cost units, so Amumu is a 1 cost unit, Nocturne is a 2 cost unit, And then you have Blitzcrank, which is a 3-cost frontline unit. And then you have Kog'Maw, which is one of the more famous ones because he has been good for majority of the set since launch. And then you have Malzahar, which is the 5-cost that's associated with the trait. When you're thinking about Automata, typically you're itemizing either Nocturne or Kog'Maw. The main tank could either be Amumu or Blitzcrank, depending on who you hit, but we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So, let's talk about different boards. So, I'm going to show you, basically, I'm going to be flip-flopping between 2 basic boards that deal with Automata. A lot of times, you're either going to be focusing on playing around Nocturne, where you're itemizing for Quick Strikers, and Nocturne, who is an AD unit, meaning that he does attack damage. See, like, the little ratio that shows, like, the orange number next to his damage numbers. And then, or you're playing around Kog'Maw, where you're going to be playing around AP, and he is a backline unit that is doing AP damage, so dealing with, like, the blue/purple stat. So, first let's talk about Kog'Maw. So, Kog'Maw, there's many different boards you can play with Kog'Maw. You can either play a situation where you have Vertical Watcher, where you just play all the Watcher units and just have Kog'Maw in the backline. But in terms of a more balanced board, a lot of times it's better to just play around 4 Automata. 4 Automata gives you a good amount of frontline because of the extra armor and MR that you get. And additionally, the blast damage or the increase to the blast damage is massive for Kog'Maw because Kog'Maw is, in his heart, an auto attacker. What do I mean by this? If you read Kog'Maw's passive, attacks deal blank amount of bonus magic damage. That means every time Kog'Maw attacks, he deals bonus magic damage for each of those auto attacks, which is huge because if you can scale up that AP that Kog'Maw has, then each of his auto attacks does a lot. His active ability is that he gains stacking attack speed, and then he gains additional plus range. So the way that it works a lot of the time is that you want Kog'Maw to kind of have a really strong front line and then ramp up. If Kog'Maw could ramp up with a Gwinsu is one of the most important items on the unit, then he'll just keep auto attacking and he'll absolutely melt everybody because between the Automata blast that you're going to be doing as well as like the actual auto attacks that do additional AP damage for each auto attack, this unit absolutely shreds. He deletes everybody. Not shreds in the TFT word definition. I mean, like he melts everybody down to nothing. The old way of building Kog'Maw typically was you put a Gwinsu on him, Archangels, because then if you scale up over time the Gwinsu and the Archangels, then you're scaling a bunch of AP for each of the auto attacks, and then you're stacking the Gwinsu, which gives him a bunch of attack speed to continue doing auto attacks. And then because he does so much damage, a Hextech Gunblade usually gives him the ability to sustain his front line as well as be like more resilient to getting like stray hit and deleted from, like, you know, for example, like a Zoe that tries to snipe him. He has a means of healing in the backline. Whenever you play this board, until you find a Malzahar, you typically play around 4 Automata. You're rolling on level 7 because this is a 3-cost board, so that's why it's really efficient to go for both Scar and Blitzcrank as your main tanks. Either or both of them 3-star is pretty good. This is where the expensive part of the board comes into play. Here I have a Mundo just because he's a Dominator. You don't really need the Mundo. You can interchange him with somebody else. You can also play around 4 Watcher later in the game. So for example, you can play like a Garen and somebody else. I don't know, like another Watcher, a Vander, right? You have like other options later in the game if you're able to level, but just to give synergy to Blitzcrank, if Blitzcrank is your main tank, I'm just showing you that you could play a Dominator because it gives Blitzcrank some stacking AP. Blitzcrank is really hard to kill. He has this damage nullification effect and he scales really well off AP, but additionally Blitzcrank just gets, with a bunch of armor, also makes a bunch of shielding for himself, which is absolutely absurd. So this Blitzcrank unit, especially if you get him to 3-star, is going to be a really good synergy to have with the Kog'Maw. Additionally, Scar is very tanky, and you can get the synergy with Firelight for having a Zeri on your board, which gives Sniper to Kog'Maw as well. But this board is really flexible. The problem with this board is just that it's very expensive. A lot of times if you don't, like in order to hit Kog'Maw 3, as well as a 3-star 3-cost, you need to have like either a really good spot for it or a lot of gold. And a lot of times people are just able to make it to like 5 costs and other high cost units a lot more easily. And this comp does fall off because you're really dependent on, in my opinion, I think you need both Scar 3 and Blitzcrank 3 to get like, you know, a top 2 finish with this comp. It really falls off hard. A way to make it more reliable is to play 6 Watcher instead, but then you sacrifice a lot of the damage, and it's a lot less of an efficient roll down, and then you're kind of relying on just Scar as the main tank, which is a little bit more iffy. So it's a little bit of an awkward comp to play. It's a little bit clumsy, so just be careful of that. But we're going to talk about when it's a lot better of a spot to play this comp as I go through some other boards. I'll go through it right now. So one of the main ways that this comp becomes significantly better is with an Automata +1. If you have an Automata +1, you get to 6 Automata. This board is absolutely broken. A lot of times, a Kog'Maw 2-star does enough damage because of how much damage you get from the Automata Blast, right? Every 20 attacks, this Kog'Maw just unleashes, like, he just launches a nuke. Like, he just launches, like, 1,000+ damage, like, just bang, and just kills units, like, randomly. Like, there's so many times where you're just looking at your board, and it's like, where did it go? And it's like, oh, I guess Kog'Maw just attacked, like, 5 extra times and just deleted everybody. It's insane. 6 Automata, this is with an emblem, and you have to find a Malzahar. So it's a little bit awkward to hit everything, but in this case, a lot of times, all that you really need are the Automata units. You get so much armor from the Automata trait that, you know, just going for Blitzcrank 3 here is probably enough to warrant, like, your board being strong. It's insane. So with the amount of armor that you get, Kog'Maw is also really tanky in the backline, so you don't have to worry about him getting sniped anymore. By that reasoning, you usually just put something like a Guinsoo and a Shiv. The Shiv has a good synergy with Guinsoo because it'll keep using the stack Shiv will keep shredding and dealing additional magic damage to like extra units, which just boosts the whole damage of your entire board. But of course, this is a very high roll board because you have to find a Malzahar in order to hit 6 Automata, or you need to have 2 Automata emblems, which sometimes can happen in like an Ambessa Galaxy, or like you get one on Carousel. It's crafted with a spatula, so it's actually quite easy to make the Automata emblem. So if you're in like Loot Sub, for example, anything where there's like a lot of variants, you can actually get this board fairly reliably. Additionally, sometimes you don't even need to go for Kog'Maw 3 or Blitzcrank 3. Sometimes I've seen people tempo. We'll talk about tempoing with this comp after, but you can just like make it to like level 9 based on how strong it is a lot of the time if you actually hit this early enough. But this is what I mean. I would normally not play this type of board unless you have a really good spot for it, right? Unless you're starting the game out with a Kog'Maw or like a Blitzcrank and you have like a really good spot for Automata, or you have something like, there's an augment called Fractured Crystals, which is quite nice, that gives you Automata units as well. I wouldn't necessarily default myself to say, this is a cool reroll that I'm going to play 10 out of 10 times. This is a sometimes food. This is like, hey, my spot looks really good for this. I have really good Kog'Maw items, right? I have a lot of bows and a lot of like tears and rods, and it's like, I don't know what to do with them. Then I would play towards this. If you hit an Automata emblem, this is a lot more reliable as a comp. You are much more stable earlier in the game around the Automata emblem being 4 Automata, and you cap a lot higher with 6 Automata. I cannot stress it enough. This is one of the broken, game-winning, it's great. Automata +1, arguably one of the best emblems you can have if you're playing around this board. It just requires, like, you know, maybe being uncontested because you're obviously playing around reroll units. So often you're going to stay at a lower level and try and reroll them if you really want to hit that max cap. But it opens up a lot of possibilities. Now, those are 2 Kog'Maw boards. We're going to take a second and we're going to pivot and talk about some Nocturne boards. So I remember what I was saying before. I was talking about, like, you know, Kog'Maw, and this is Kog'Maw. The other carry is Nocturne. If you're prioritizing around a Nocturne carry, Nocturne you typically want to play with Vertical Quick Striker. Whenever you play around a Nocturne carry, you typically go 4 Automata, 4 Quick Striker. This is without an emblem. Obviously, you have an emblem, you could play around 6 Automata. But typically, you want to hit 4 Quick Striker. 4 Quick Striker has this huge buff where on death, Quick Strikers dash to a new target and they gain a shield. This 4 Quick Striker buff, I cannot stress the importance of it enough. If you are playing any sort of Quick Striker board, 4 Quick Striker is a huge and massive increase to your DPS and survivability. It is so important. The dashing to a new target alone is massive because it keeps up your Omnivamp uptime a lot better. Because, like, a lot of times when you're playing melee carries, the most miserable part is when they're like slowly like walking over, like they got nothing to do with themselves. And it's just like, and then they just die because they're not hitting anything and they're not getting the Omnivamp and sustaining themselves. This Nocturne unit is really frail and he kind of sucks. I'm going to be real. I don't believe in this Nocturne unit since the start of the set. Every time I play this Nocturne unit, I don't have one of the quote-unquote win conditions. It is very, very sad how fast it falls off. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of success you can have, but with 4 Automata, there's like barely enough armor and damage that you have. In addition to that, with 4 Quick Striker, like this board does work. Like you can get a top 1 with this board, but typically you're gonna get like you're playing for like a top 4 if you're playing it without the win conditions. And then you can also itemize Kog'Maw if you have Kog'Maw items. You can itemize the same TF with the same items if you're playing around TF. This board's a bit clumsy though, because if you look at the board, we have Mbessa that's required to get to 4 Quick Striker, and she is quite difficult to hit because a lot of people play around Mbessa with a lot of different boards. She's an emissary unit. People will just buy Mbessa. So the main problem with this board is that you need to not only hit Nocturne 3-star, you also have to be able to level and then also find an Mbessa, right? When we're talking about Kog'Maw, and I'm showing you these boards, you're rolling on level 7. A lot of times with Nocturne, you either have to high roll the Nocturne such that you can roll on level 7 and hit a Blitzcrank 3 as well, or you have to be rolling on 6 and then hope that you high roll some of the other aspects of this board in order to actually hit like a stabilized, really strong version of the board. So it requires a lot of gold and also requires a really good spot. I wouldn't play towards Nocturne. We'll talk about where you play around Nocturne in a second. I know everybody's like, that's the elephant in the room everybody wants me to talk about probably. But like, if you don't have either Ornn artifacts or Emblem, I would not angle myself towards Nocturne unless I have a bunch of Nocturnes, right? Unless I just found a bunch of Nocturnes, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, this is probably a Nocturne game. A lot of times with this board, you want to get a Blitzcrank 3. You just want to take some of the aggro off of the Nocturne, right? If all of your units are dog shit and they don't have any defensive stats or anything like that, then the Nocturne's going to get aggroed and the Nocturne's going to die. I don't know how else to put it. This Nocturne does not spark joy. He dies very fast. If you have not played Nocturne, I guarantee you, play more Nocturne and you will see this guy just gets deleted off the face of the earth. And then you look at your board, you're like, where did my Nocturne go? He doesn't have built-in Omnivamp. That's his main issue. So, like, Nocturne would be really good if you could put 4 items on Nocturne. Because the problem with Nocturne is that he does an insane amount of damage. So, here I show, like, a full crit build. You can also build him with, like, BT. Here, I'll make another Nocturne. Right? You can build Nocturne in many ways, so he's very flexible. But a lot of times you need at least 1 Omnivamp on him, because he doesn't have built-in Omnivamp. So you either need to make a Hodge or a BT. If you're making a BT, typically I like to go something like BT Starex and just make him a little bit tankier, like BT Starex +1. But you need him, or you can go full crit like this. I like the full crit better, because like as frail as Nocturne is, I just want him to like go out like a popping light bulb in the olden days, you know? I want him to burn bright and fast and do a shit ton of damage and kill everybody, and then if he dies, you know, like go out in a blazing glory. So I'd rather him be like full crit like this, QSS, uninterrupted spinning, spin to win, IE, massive damage, Hodge, crit item glove, he's 100% crit or close to 100% crit, bunch of attack speed, and just absolutely melt everybody. But there's other options of building. Any melee items can work. You can even put an Edge of Night to take off some of the aggro if he gets into a bad spot. And then Kog'Maw, you can put on Kog'Maw. You can build double melee, and you can carry Mbessa in these type of setups. All of these are pretty good. Additionally, this board has many different variations, because this is one variation where I'm just showing 4 Automata, 4 Quick Striker, but you can basically play any set of these 4 based on what you hit. So there is a little bit of flexibility. You know, if you find a bunch of Nocturnes for free, sometimes you can play around 4 Emissary, 4 Quick Striker, and you can just play Nocturne with an Mbessa dual carry. That is an option if you're high rolling, or if it's a galaxy where you have a lot of gold and you just hit a bunch of Nocturnes. Also, if you're like worth the weight Nocturne or something like that, this is an opportunity for you to cap your board a lot higher. Or you can play Emissary with 4 Automata and you drop the amount of Quick Strikers. This gives you a lot more tankiness, as well as it helps out, but I wouldn't recommend these Emissary boards unless you're in a very strong spot to play around them. Because Emissary, obviously that's a board you want to roll on level 8, and you need a lot of gold to hit Emissaries in the first place, so it doesn't really synergize with the idea of playing around reroll. Now, Nocturne outside of these conditions is very middling, but with these conditions, you're basically always playing for a first. It is very strong. I also put some other win conditions here for the Automata trait in general. I'm going to talk about them each one by one. So first, let's start with Nocturne. Nocturne, right here, I just put a bunch of Ornn artifacts. I'm going to start with this one. I'm going to put everything towards the bottom here. So we're going to talk about this Nocturne first. With Nocturne, one of the biggest problems I was talking about is that he feels kind of frail. He doesn't have built-in Omnivamp, so you always have to put Omnivamp on him. And then the rest of your items, it's kind of hard. It's a little bit clumsy to fit in all the items that you want to put on Nocturne. You can remedy all of those issues, because if you turn Nocturne into a ranged unit, this unit does a massive amount of damage. He absolutely melts everybody. So what's the broken combination? Ornn artifacts. Fishbones doubles your range. RFC gives you a bunch of attack speed and increases your range for every time you kill somebody, plus it gives you +1 range. Sniper's Focus gives you +2 range, as well as damage amp for how far away you are from the target. These are the win conditions for Nocturne, because if you can make Nocturne not take damage in the front line, you don't have to build Omnivamp, you don't have to build tanky, like, melee carry items, like an Edge of Night, or something like, what do you call it, like a QSS. Well, QSS is still good because he has attack speed, but you don't have to build like a Starex, you don't have to build a Titans, you don't have to build those melee items that are so good on melee units to give them survivability, because you just put him here. You just, look, ready, watch. Mid unit that might die easily, broken unit that does a shit ton of damage and is one of the best backline carries in the game. It's insane. That's all you need. All you need is plus range on this guy. Nocturne just wants to be a backline unit. That's his dream. Every night he goes to sleep and he says, I want to be a backline unit, and I hope one day my dreams come true. And you can make his dreams come true by giving him a fucking Fishbones or an RFC or a Sniper's Focus. Typically, you don't need all of them. A lot of times, the best combination is something like this, where you do Fishbones, RFC, and like an IE just to give him massive damage. RFC and Fishbones gives him enough attack speed, and with Quick Striker, he absolutely melts anyway, so you don't need more attack speed. And RFC gives increased range, and Fishbones doubles the range. So like, he'll be like, you just put him like straight in the back line with this type of thing, right? Like he has like 5 range, and then he increases by more each time. It's very strong. It's very broken. Just be aware of it. We're going to talk about it a little bit more after when we talk about the boards, but that's one of the win conditions. Another one for Kog'Maw, we don't really talk about Kog'Maw win conditions, but Gambler's Blade is very strong on Kog'Maw. Not because it does a massive amount of damage like Nocturne, it just makes the board a lot more reliable. Kog'Maw, all he cares about is auto-attacking, and this unit, all it does is auto-attack a massive amount. So if you give him a Gambler's Blade, he just becomes a better gold generator than most gold generation augments. In addition, Gambler's Blade gives him a bunch of attack speed, which he wants anyways, and it gives him some ability power. It's crazy. So what you do is, if you ever have an opportunity where you see a Kog'Maw and you see a Gambler's Blade, bang, you put them together. Gambler's Blade is very easy to hit because it's offered in a lot of augments, because it's a shimmer scale gold generation item, so you can hit it pretty convincingly or pretty easily. Additionally, other Ornn artifacts are still good with the Kog'Maw line. Something like a Wit's End is a good Kog'Maw item, and something like a Lichbane is a good Kog'Maw item. The last win condition is one that's a little bit rare, but there was a video on my channel where I did this, and that is Automata emblem on Mel. If you have an Automata emblem, the best holder of it is usually Mel, I think, quote unquote, just because of the way that it works with her ability cast and everything. So you should always put it on a Mel if you see a Mel. That's like game winning in a lot of spots. So now, let's talk about the two different boards. If you're playing around Kog'Maw with a Gambler's Blade, this is a really good mid-game board. You don't even have to commit to Kog'Maw here. You can play any board you want, but a lot of times if you're playing in the mid-game, if you see a Kog'Maw and a Gambler's Blade, you slap those two together and you make a shit ton of money. It is like get rich quick. It is so good. That's just something that helps. Also, if you're playing around this Kog'Maw board, remember the Kog'Maw board I was mentioning earlier? I said it's expensive. You have to play it from a good spot. It's hard to hit all of these units, etc., etc. The thing that works really well with Kog'Maw is that if you have the Gambler's Blade, you generate so much gold that it decreases a lot of that variance. The more gold you have in TFT, the easier it is to hit a particular board. If you're dedicated to playing around Kog'Maw and Blitzcrank reroll with Scar, you can 3-star everybody like this because you get so much gold from Gambler's Blade with Kog'Maw that is just a good investment. It's a good opportunity. You can always move the Gambler's Blade later in the game if you want to put more damage on Kog'Maw. Like if you want to move that and put a Gunblade on him, that's fine. But from your early to mid game, it is very strong. So if you see something like a Shimmer Scale augment and you see that you have a Kog'Maw, you can just generate gold, make it a really nice fast 8 or a fast 9, depending on how strong or how high roll your mid game goes. Or you can commit to the Kog'Maw reroll if you think that you have a good spot for it. That's just something that's like a very strong option. And that's usually where I'm considering to play around Kog'Maws, if I see that early Gambler's Blade. Now, Nocturne. When you're playing around Nocturne with Fishbones, RFC, or any of the +1 ranges, you just want to play 4 Automata, 4 Quick Striker. You don't have to hit 6 Automata, but if you hit 6 Automata, then it's a Giga win YouTube video. I cannot stress this enough. A Nocturne 2-star literally can get you to like level 9. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, Nocturne 2 is broken. Now, the reason this is so frustrating is because they recently added the Jace portal to the game. So there's basically 3 hits that are almost guaranteed top 4s for Nocturne. The only thing that could stop you from guaranteed top 4 if you see any of the +1 range ones, so all the +1 range, when I say +1 range artifacts, I did an artifact guide as well, so like I mentioned it there in addition to here. But when I say +1 range, it's these 3 items, right? Even a sniper's emblem on him does the same thing, but basically like fishbones, RFC, or snipers, any of these 3 on a Nocturne. Fishbones is the best just because of the stats that it gives, but any of these 3 on Nocturne, the game is kind of done. You're kind of playing for a top 4. Now, it kind of sucks because they made the Jace portal. There's always going to be stuff like this, by the way. They added all of these things with artifacts. So, like, they made artifacts, like, they basically, like, a couple sets ago, they added a bunch of artifacts to the game. And there's always these broken combinations that occur. Some of them are more broken than others, obviously. To me, it kind of ruins the game a little bit because I used to love Ornn artifacts. I used to play around them all the time. You can check my videos from like a year ago. I used to only play around Ornn artifacts. That was my thing. That was my play style. So like now it's like it's very like RNG. Like you have to match the Ornn artifact with the unit, and then it makes like a giga combination a lot of the time. That's what makes Nocturne really broken. He just wants to be a backline unit. That's what you should always think about this guy. He doesn't have the tools to make himself an incredibly broken frontline unit. And even if they buff him to be a better frontline unit, then it will only be worse for this. So like now, like, you know, Nocturne already got nerfed a little bit of AD. I'm sure Nocturne will get more nerfs. So like other boards without the Ornn artifact are probably going to suffer more because this Nocturne unit is probably going to get nerfed just for these specific scenarios. But always make sure to put him in the backline. If you have enough range that you can actually fully backline him, then you can literally just corner him and he'll just delete everybody, especially if you have an RFC. You want Quick Striker in. 4 Quick Striker is a huge buff. 2-star Nocturne is often good enough. 3-star Nocturne is game winning. Because 2-star Nocturne is so strong, you can even contest while playing this line. I don't recommend to play contested boards often, especially contested reroll, but I have to be honest with everybody here in my videos. I try my best to describe things as they are, as plainly and as like well informed as possible. There are times that if it's a Jace artifact game, you will see like 4 or 5 Nocturne players and they'll all go top 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 sometimes. That's not always the case. Depends on your elo, right? In high level play or in higher level play, usually you can support 2 people or maybe 3 people. If there's too many Nocturne players, then everybody just dies because like somebody else hits a really strong board uncontested. But what I'm trying to say is that it's very hard to pass up on this type of opportunity. You can additionally, if you see Fishbones and RFC, you can also tempo fast 9. Let's say somebody else is playing Nocturne. You can play a Nocturne 2-star, and then you can eventually pivot your board late game to play around some 5 cost with Fishbones RFC. That's also an opportunity that you can do. I just don't have them in here because that's like a whole separate video of content. Additionally, I mentioned before Artifactory. So like, you know, if we go here, like set 13 info, augments, right? And we go like Artifactory. These are situations that you typically want to play around Nocturne, right? The thing with Artifactory is that there's lots of really strong hits even outside of the Nocturne line when you're playing around AUTOMATA, right? If you can guarantee multiple Ornn artifacts in a game, it's very good to play around this line. Why is that? Blitzcrank gets a shield. So Blitzcrank is actually a very good user of Unending Despair. This is very broken on Blitzcrank because whenever shield breaks, you do a bunch of damage, and Blitzcrank makes a shield all the time. That's his active ability, and he just makes these huge shields, and they do a bunch of damage. So Unending Despair is really strong. Something like, ooh, sorry, I'm on the wrong board. 1 second. Here, I'll go here. So let's say this board, for example, right? If we go with our Ornn artifacts, right? Anima Visage, general tank item, very good on your front line because it gives you a bunch of HP and it recovers HP. Automata units get a bunch of armor, so that's a good Ornn artifact to use. Blading Jewel, some people put it on Kog'Maw. It's not that good on Kog'Maw, but it's usable, whatever. Deathfire Grass, whatever, AD items. If you have a Fishbones or an RFC, then something like Gold Collector is insane on this unit because he just like kills units and executes them instantly. Things like Luden's Tempest or even like Innervating Locket or Unending Despair because it works with shield procs is insane on Blitzcrank. Something like Trenchcoat is broken on Mbessa. Like, the list goes on. There's so many of these artifacts. Wit's End is great on Kog'Maw. We already talked about Gambler's Blade being broken on Kog'Maw. Like, there's so many options for Ornn artifacts that it's hard to miss. You can itemize somebody when you're playing around this architecture of this board. So a lot of times if you're already playing around Automata, making sure that you guarantee as many Ornn artifacts as possible, this is like the quote-unquote Ornn artifact comp. They're all just very strong on all of the units. Mittens is really good on Mbessa. It's also good on other units. Even something like what's it called? TF stuns, right? like in this type of situation, right? So then you can even make use of stuff like Horizon Focus, which stuns other users. If you have like Giga broken like lots, if you have like 6 Automata and they're like unkillable Blitzcrank, then you can get Talisman of Ascension, and then you can just make him like absolutely like rock everybody by just growing to like 1,000 HP and just never 10,000 HP, sorry, and just never dying. The list goes on and on. There are so many artifacts that work well with these comps that you might as well just, you know, if you're already playing towards this and you're like desperately in need of going first, or you're playing around an artifact galaxy, just popping artifacts, just rip those shits like they're scratch tickets and you're looking for the Maximilian, you can win very easily. It has a lot of win conditions. They're just tied behind artifacts, and this is like the, you know, I have a bunch of artifacts, you look at this comp first a lot of the time. So that's basically Automata. Early game, you know, 4 Automata is very strong early game. So if you're playing around these units, a lot of times, like, you know, if you have an Automata +1, for example, or even 4 Automata early, you get so much armor as well as the damage that you get for the 4 Automata Blast, that usually if you're playing around Automata, you can just build a board around these units. Obviously, an early Automata emblem is massive because then you can actually build like strong boards. So for example, like let's say you just have like a random Watcher. Let's just remove him, for example, right? Getting an early 4 Automata, you get so much armor. You get so much armor that a lot of times you can win out on your stage 2, stage 3. The beefier your front line is with the armor, the more your Kog'Maw can ramp up. So you can play around Kog'Maw. Or if you have a bunch of armor, then your Nocturne doesn't become as frail. So early game and mid game, if you have like a Nocturne 2 with items, he can go off. He can pop off. He has the tools to actually be successful. So early game boards, usually you're just trying to play around 4 Automata as much as possible, or you're trying to make some sort of sniper build where you're playing around Kog'Maw with some sort of front line where you're playing 2 Automata and like Watcher, Zeri. So like a really good perfect synergy board. It's a little bit of higher roll, but sometimes you find yourself in this spot. Check this out: 2 Automata, 2 Firelight, 2 Sniper, 2 Watcher. GG. If you get something like this, it's a pretty good early game board. It's very efficient. But there's lots of other options, like you can play around Maddie or another sniper a lot of the time. If you're playing around Nocturne, it's a little bit harder. A lot of times you're not really winning out early, but then you have to roll on level 6. So it's one of those comps where you try and like prioritize items and then you fix your board a little bit later. But anyways, condition for success. Sorry I didn't put in like multiple slides. I made a mistake. But basically, you usually want to have a strong early game because you have to roll so much and you have to hit some win conditions. You want to have as much HP to give you the time to hit those win conditions later. Often a spatula or Ornn artifacts are huge because you spike so hard off 6 Automata and you spike so hard off of many different Ornn artifacts that if you hit either of those, you will probably put yourself in a very convincing top 4 spot. Lots of Automata units helps, lots of gold for rerolling helps, because if you can 3-star everybody, whether or not you have Ornn artifacts or whether or not you have the emblem, you will be in a good spot. Items for quick strikers or Kog'Maw are also a must because you either have to decide that you're going to prioritize as your Nocturne main carry for most of your game, or if you're going to go for Kog'Maw main carry most of the game. However, one thing that's really important when you're playing high variance encounters, it's easier to hit these win cons, so that's usually what you're going to try and aim towards. When I say like high variance encounters, we talked about encounters yesterday. That's why I did that. So you can check out what my opinions and talked about strategies with those. But they used to be called portals. Now they're called encounters. What I mean by that is, for example, if you're playing around like Savika, where you get loot subscription. Savika with loot subscription is massive. Here it doesn't have the other ones on this website, but like stuff like Jace, where it gives you an artifact anvil early. Things where you get spatulas like Mel's encounter. A lot of these can be very strong because they give you those conditions that make you win the game pretty convincingly. We can also look at the stats, I think, right, for like the traits. Like just I usually do this on the other videos. I didn't do it earlier. I'm sorry, I made a mistake, but I'll do it right now. But you'll see what I mean by like how strong it is, right? 2 Automata is like very mid. 4 Automata is not that strong. As you can see, you don't go top 4 usually. Usually you're somewhere in like the middle pack of it not being very strong. And then 6 Automata, it's like almost always a first. Now obviously 6 Automata means you also hit a Malzahar, so the stats are definitely skewed, right? The stats are skewed. It's like a Malza, it's a Malza win or Malza 8th win, like from my other video if you watch the other one. But like the idea is that like 6 Automata is a huge win con, and if you're not playing around 6 Automata, you really want to have an Orn artifact, because otherwise it's a very like average comp, right? It's not that bad, it's not that good, but it's not like super amazing, right? It's very mid, so your spot has to be very good for it. But anyways, that's my video. Make sure to like and subscribe. Hopefully this was helpful if you're looking at Automata. I think, like, you know, most players already know that about these things and that it's really broken because everybody made 100 videos on it. But if you're a new player and you haven't seen Automata in action and you don't know if it's strong, hopefully I gave you like a good outline of how you should try and play around it, which should be somewhat helpful for some people, I'm sure. I'm working on general augment guide, scrap guide, and a couple others. I have a short list. I know I see the requests in the comments. I keep track of these things. It's just a matter of when I have time to do them. I have a little list of prioritization because I want the videos to kind of also lean into each other. So I did encounters, and I did automata, and now I'll do augments, and then I'll do something like, you know, so it all synergizes really nicely if somebody's watching from start to finish. But thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. Have a great day, and see ya.